What's up, Pivographers? I'm Grace, and today I have some awesome content for you. So as you can see on the table in front of me, I have our very own PivoPod Red and our PivoPod Silver and a load of challenges lined up. You guessed it, we will be testing how these challenges go against our Pod Red and our Pod Silver. So I'll be referring to them as A, B, C, D, E, and F. I'll be giving an overview of my first impressions of the hardware, and then we'll cut to some footage I shot previously, testing how the tracking went against our Pod Red and our Pod Silver, and also what it's like to take photos with these devices. So without further ado, let's dive into the first challenger, Challenger A. As I said before, I'm going to give a brief overview of the hardware of each pod, and then we're going to take it outside to some footage we shot before and show how each challenger competes against our Pod Red and Pod Silver. So, Challenger A. My initial first impressions looking at the device was it feels very light, and the movement of it is not as sturdy as what I expected. I suppose that is to be expected considering the device is made out of plastic. So when you go to put your smartphone in like this, it needs to go up quite high and you can't spin it. So comparatively to our smart mount, you can see that the phone itself is sitting very high in the device. And when it comes to tilting it, I think as soon as it's angled, it just falls over straight away. So it's obviously not a very secure device. The spinning of the mount is a bit, you need to really adjust the phone like this. Whereas the smart mount, as you can see, spins very freely between portrait and landscape mode. So there's no problems there. And when you have it tilted, it is secure and does not fall over. When it comes to Challenger Pod A, I'm not sure if it's just this device, but when we are using this one, we have to plug it in order for it to work, and that is a whole experience. Ready?
The device has been activated. Face tracking is on.
Oh yes, that is a feature that you cannot turn off, and yeah, suffice to say it definitely scared me in the park. But when it comes to how the tracking performed, let's take a look at the footage. So there are no signals from the device as it's lacking an application to see whether it is actually tracking or not. So if it would lose you or stop tracking, it's hard to tell if the device was broken or if it was turned off or if the tracking had simply been lost and you had to come back close up to the device again to sort of catch it. When it comes to the tracking itself, when it was tracking, it was quite jerky in its movements. In terms of the experience of the device outside, it essentially acted as a large sail and would fall over quite easily. So overall, when it comes to device A, the user experience of the device isn't the best because the mount is designed quite uncomfortably, particularly in comparison to the similar Pivo Smart Mount. The device itself is quite confusing to navigate with multiple speakers, multiple input-output ports, and the tracking itself was not the best either. So I think we can move on to Challenger B. So here we have Challenger B. My first impressions of the hardware itself was the finish, seemed quite high quality. So user experience is pretty straightforward. The mount itself, you can put your smartphone in like so. But as I mentioned before, it needs to go in fairly high up in comparison to the smart mount in order to be able to spin comfortably. Outside of that, the size is just much bigger than our Pivo Pod itself. As you can see, it's quite a cumbersome device. It comes with this stability thing. So honestly, I had quite high expectations before taking this one outside to track, but that's when my expectations were proven otherwise. Challenger B, as you can see, when it was tracking, it seemed to track in chunks. So it would track and then pause and track and pause. Also, the height of the device affected the stability and so would sort of flap in the breeze. This seemed to affect the tracking as well. It just wasn't able to keep up with the pace of running, let alone keep up with standard walking in a smooth and regular pace. So moving on to Challenger C, here we have device C. This device, as you can see, is very large. My first impressions of it was that it was quite large. It's pretty straightforward. You have a spot for a tripod here. There is another place for a mount here, not included. And you have the on button here, and the camera at the front. That was pretty straightforward. Without the mount attachment in the top, the actual way to, the smartphone falls out quite easily. You have these little numbers, which the experience isn't the best, but I suppose you can secure it like so with these sort of little plastic attachments that come with the pod. When we took it outside to track, it would jerk quite consistently, as you can see, and it simply just wasn't able to keep up with the pod red or the pod silver. Another key problem I had with this experience was to do with this sort of included mount system. It just wasn't secure enough to fit the smartphone, and the breeze would move the smartphone or it would be leaning backwards, and the resulting footage just wasn't what I was looking for. So that is the overview of how Challengers A, B, and C fared with tracking. We also went outside and tested what it was like to take pictures with those different devices. So as you can see with Challenger B, you simply open the camera application and take a photo from there. You can set a timer, and that is essentially the whole experience. Challengers really don't add much to how you would usually use your phone just set up in a tripod, whereas within the free Pivo Pod app, you have access to all of these different ways to take your photos. We have an awesome feature called Smart Capture, which combined with tracking means you can move anywhere in your space, and you can click, or you can say cheese, or simply stand still, and Pivo will register this and take your photo for you. So you really don't need to be moving back and forth to your phone. With the application or with the remote control, you can really step away from your phone and move within your space with the capabilities of tracking to take some really awesome photos completely hands-free. So, Challenger D. The hardware, it seems a bit cumbersome, particularly when compared to our Pivo Pod. It comes with this mount attachment, which seems to be fairly standard for a lot of the Challengers. So in terms of the experience of the mount, it seems to be pretty standard. Your smartphone needs to sit very high up, but what is different with the smart mount in comparison is it's very easy and smooth to move around, it's solid, and also the smart mount itself is aluminium and much more durable. It's not rechargeable in the sense that it is with the Pivo Pod. It's actually battery powered. One of the key differences with this Challenger is it comes with an app. So taking it outside, I had quite high expectations because one of the huge benefits of having an application is being able to see if the device is tracking you. So as you can see in our footage, you have the Pivo Pod with the Pivo Pod app set to body tracking. Our Challenger D only has face tracking and object tracking available, and we used face tracking for this example. So when it comes to the actual tracking itself, what we found was it was very slow. Once you select tracking in Challenger D's application, that's the end of the capabilities with tracking. Whereas in the Pivo Pod app, you can choose the speed of the tracking. So even up against Pivo Pod Red, this device was not able to keep up at the same pace and certainly couldn't keep up with our 2 times faster Pod Silver. Using our device D, which came with an application. The photo taking experience was interesting because as soon as you turn the device on and you have face tracking set up in camera mode, for some reason there is a countdown that is constantly going. So it would start from 3, 2, and then stop, or it would start taking photos and then it would stop altogether. So it was a bit of a confusing experience as I wasn't sure when to pose, when I was taking photos, when I wasn't taking photos, and yeah. So outside of that, the actual application itself seems to have a permanent edit or soft blur effect filter over the videos and photos. So the quality of the images I was getting were not as good as your regular camera application or the Pivo Pod app. So I think we can move on to Challenger E. Here we have Challenger E. As you can see, the general design seemed to go with the same shape, which I suppose could be seen as wind resistant. Challenger E is also battery charged, and the device itself has a camera here in the front and then this mount for your phones. And generally I find the experience of this not the best, particularly when it comes to, taking it out. So when it came to tracking, I wasn't too sure whether there was a problem with the device, but it only seemed to be able to track in about a 30-degree space. We couldn't see whether it was tracking as there was no application, as with pods A, B, and C. When it did seem to track, it would abruptly lock on, and then for some reason it would track sporadically here, and then it would just stop past a certain point. Overall, the mount for the smartphone is not the best experience and wasn't secure in practice either, and tracking was very limited. So from here, last but not least, I think we can move on to Challenger F. So when it comes to the hardware of Challenger F, the device itself is smaller than the Pivo Pod, as you can see, but the device itself cannot be used without this mount that comes with it. So using the mount itself and having your smartphone in, the device itself is not as secure as you would hope it to be. Moving the mount any degree forward or backward means that the device falls over, so it needs to be used with a tripod. Unfortunately, it wouldn't work unless it was plugged into a battery, so as you will be able to see in the footage coming up, that's the setup that we had. Taking this pod outside, the tracking itself, as with all the other devices that did not have an application, was sporadic to say the least. It was inconsistent when it came to tracking, and it would often fall over. The tracking really speaks for itself in terms of the size minus the mount. It's quite small, but then it's impossible to use this device without a mount and without being attached to a tripod or other sort of stand to secure it in place. So that concludes our adventure on testing 6 of these challenges against our Pod Red and Pod Silver. After testing all of these 6 challenges against our Pivo Pods, I think I can confidently say that the whole user experience of our Pivo Pods is significantly better. In terms of tracking, none of these 6 competitors were able to keep up at any speed really, and the tracking that we did see was quite jerky and very inconsistent. I mean, you can take my word for it, but I think the footage really speaks for itself in this case. So I hope everyone enjoyed the review of our Pivo Pod Red and Pivo Pod Silver against these other competitors, and I'm excited to see you guys next time. Bye!